Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training session. My name is Mike. I'm a project coordinator here with Africa Fire Mission. So happy you guys took time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's training. Today, we're again joined by Mark Fyest, who's been doing a bunch of training for us online. He's going to be traveling with us here coming up in November. We're excited to have Mark back here again to share his knowledge of ropes and knots with us today. If you attend about 70% of today's training, which is usually 40 to 45 minutes, you're going to receive a certificate of attendance for today's training. If you get bumped off or you have any issues or you can't stay for the whole class, keep an eye on the chat. I'll put some information in there how to access our Google Drive, where you can view a video recording of today's class as well as our other classes from this year and receive a certificate of attendance for those as well if you answer a few questions. Before we get started with our training, I'm going to pass it over to Jose, who's Africa Fire Mission's fire safety advocate, for a couple words of encouragement.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you so much, Mr. Mark, for coming yet again. And also thanks, Alejandra, for joining in for the first time. We're truly happy to have you on board. And you from all over Africa, wow, and I'm excited. We are hitting now at 76, and just last week, it was our first time to hit 100. And I was just thinking to myself during the week, as the week started, what virtues do I take in as a firefighter? What virtues should I have as a fireman? What can I have so that I can go with them? Or I can put it inside my pocket, what virtues can I have in my pockets? And as I was researching and checking on the internet, though I'm not going so much deep in it, one of the virtues that is important as you as a firefighter is having integrity. Yeah. By yourself, as for example, as Jose, do you have integrity? How do you hold yourself? How does the public perceive of you as a firefighter? So with that is very important. Number two, I need to be physically fit. Do you run? Do you walk? Do you do some sort of exercises to keep you fit? So that when you get onto the fire ground and you're fighting fire, we won't start doing first aid on you because you're physically unfit. Are you flexible? Number three, you need to be flexible and adaptable. You see, in the firehouse, it's very unique. Today you might be the person who's cleaning the fire engine, and tomorrow I might send you to the kitchen. Are you comfortable? Are you flexible? And the day after, you might be the one who's helping maybe the battalion chief to do actually issues on shift change and something of the sort. So flexibility is one of the virtues you need to have as a firefighter. And last but not least, you need to be a team player. Because when you go on the fire ground, if you're not a team player, you don't need to be in the fire ground. Yeah, because in the fire ground, it's very unique. You need to help each other. You need to be in watch eyes for your colleague, and then watch eyes on the job that you've been given, the duty you've been given on the ground. That and much more, you need to go to the internet and check what's up so that you can see what attributes or virtues you need to have. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thank you so much, Jose. We always appreciate you being here, all the work that you do for us over there. At this point in time, I think we're going to pass it right along to Mark to begin with our ropes and knots. If you guys have a hunk of rope around, maybe that would help to follow along. So to go ahead, Mark, take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jose, and everybody. Welcome to our session today. Good afternoon to you, but good morning to me. It's morning time for where I am, and I'm back on duty again where I work as a battalion chief at the fire department here. So I am working in two senses right now. So you may hear in the background the alarms going off when a call comes in. Hopefully not, but if it does, don't be too surprised by it. I won't have to go, hopefully, but if it's a major incident, I may have to take you with me or just leave at that point. But having said that, good to be back with you fine folks again. And our topic today is ropes and knots, and as it ties into technical rescue operations. For those of you who do read the blog that's posted by the Africa Fire Mission, the blog I wrote for this month is on confined space rescue operations. So the two are closely aligned in terms of using of rope. And we're going to look at today the very basics of ropes and knots, because without being able to tie the rope into a knot and using the rope itself, any technical rescue operation that you may be taking part in for either rope rescue or confined space or anything is pretty well useless, right? So these basics of how to use the rope and what knots we're going to use and why the knots are beneficial is a very important key component. So I'm gonna get my screen shared for all of us here. And as I'm doing that, I don't want to be a rude individual, but after I'm done with you folks here today, I've got another meeting at 10 o'clock my time after this with our Department for Health and Safety. And then when I'm done that, I got another 11 o'clock Zoom meeting after that, and then a lunchtime meeting after that. So as soon as I'm done here, I'll be saying goodbye, and then I'll have to sign off and get to my next meeting for my day here today. But so ropes and knots. Let's look at ropes and knots. And again, this is not a very sexy topic that we can look at. However, it's very needed. It's like building a house. When you build a house, we got to build a very strong foundation first. And upon that foundation, we can build the rest of our structure. And when looking at technical rescue, as far as rope rescue, confined space, even trench and structural collapse, and water rescue, rope is used. And with that rope, we do tie our knots. And so that's why it's not sexy, but it's very much foundational. It helps us to build upon for the next building block. And with respect to rope, there's lots of uses that we have for rope. It's not just meant for technical rescue. So we can use rope on the fire ground for a number of things that can be both emergency and non-emergency type situations, right? So it's quite vast in the options we have to using rope. So I'll give you an example that's not tech rescue related. Let's say we go to a fire call today. All of us, we're jumping in the big fire truck and off we go to a fire call, and we get to the scene, and I got to send a crew up to the roof to do some roof work. They're going to cut a big hole for us to do ventilation. And while they're up there, they think, oh, you know what? I forgot to bring the axe. I can't cut the hole without my axe. So what do we do? So if we did have a bag of rope with us, we could lower the rope bag down to the ground and say to the guy in the ground, hey, partner, grab me an axe, rig it up in the rope, and I'll hoist the axe up to the roof. There's an example of rope being used for fireground operations that's not technical rescue related. On the tech rescue side, as I mentioned, we use it for a lot of things. As you see here on the slide in front of you, we use rope to raise objects or raise people. For lowering, same thing, lowering an object down or lowering a person down. We use it for support in terms of safety lines so that we don't fall off or fall over off an edge into a big, large opening and stuff like that. So there's different uses for us that rope plays into in terms of tech rescue and also on the fire ground. When we look at rope, there's two categories. When looking at rope, there's what's called life safety rope, and then there's what's called utility rope. And the two are different to a certain degree in terms of what they're meant for. Life safety rope is any kind of rope that we or you are going to use when we are going to support a person on the end of it. That's the basic definition of it. So if I'm going to lower one of my firefighters over the edge of a building to lower them down to do a tech rescue operation, it has to be life safety rope. If I'm going to put a person, a civilian, on the end of that rope to raise them back up from that building to the roof, just to save them from what they may be facing, it has to be life safety rope. Where we see utility rope being used is for anything not life safety related. What does that mean? That means if I'm going to raise an axe from the ground up to the roof of a building, that can be utility rope because it's not a person on the end of it. So when I have life hanging on the rope, it's got to be life safety rope. If it's a non-life object like an axe, piece of hose, whatever it might be, if it's not a human being, it can be utility rope. So that's how we can define those two categories in its basic entity. So we have a very foundational approach to it. And life safety rope is designed specially in terms of being able to support that human being on the end of it. If you look at that on our slide, it says there the word construction, and below that it talks about how it's made. There's a fancy word there called block creel construction. What does that mean? What that means is when a manufacturer who's making rope, when they start to produce that piece of rope out of their press or out of their manufacturing machine, they produce it nonstop. So they may not print off, but they will certainly produce and roll off of the press maybe 1,000 feet or more in one shot. So it's one continuous piece of rope that then gets cut up as it needs to be for our benefit. So if I need 100 feet of rope for my rope bags for my fire trucks here where I work, I order it from the manufacturer. I need 2 100-foot lengths of rope. They go to the huge, massive block creel that's sitting on a big roll, and they pull off 100 feet of rope and they cut it there. And that 100-foot section is one continuous section made from end to end. It's not finger jointed. It's not piecemeal together. It is one continuous piece of rope because it has to be to support a human being on the end of it. That's what makes it very special in terms of life safety rope. So don't get too hung up by that word, but just so you know, block creel construction refers to a continuous fiber from end to end. There's no breaking point in between that. When you, as a user, buy rope or get rope, so if you buy some rope from a manufacturer, make sure you get the proper information about it. Right? It has to come with a tag to identify that it has been produced in accordance with NFPA 1983 standards. It's been manufactured to that standard. It is certified to be life safety rope. So without that identification of the rope, we don't know then, is it really life safety rope or just utility rope? But if it comes with that information, then we at least know, hey, this is life safety certified and approved rope. We also want to, as a user, we need to look after the rope, right? So once we get it, we can't just say, okay, got it, and you throw it on the truck and that's where it sits and never look at it again. It has to be inspected on a regular basis, and that's going to be usually on a month-to-month basis. So every month, you're going to want to take that rope out, take the rope bag off the truck, look at the rope, inspect it from end to end to make sure it's actually good to use. It doesn't have any cuts or fraying. It's not burned. It hasn't been by chance spliced with another rope. It's not over 10 years old as far as the age of it. It's clean. It's not dirty. There's nothing sharp that's been embedded in the rope from previous use. That's all part of my inspection process. And when I do that on a monthly basis, me as a user and yourself being the user, you are guaranteeing that that rope is good to use. when it comes time. It's not going to fail when we have to use it. So it's important for us to inspect it on a regular basis, as well as maintain it. Right? Rope has to be maintained. It has to be cleaned. It can be washed with soap and water. It can be dried in a nice, cool, vented area, not in direct sunlight. And that's how we maintain a rope. And by doing proper maintenance of it, we are ensuring it will last us the duration of its life that it needs to be. And then lastly, we have to retire it. So there will come a point in time when that rope will be retired based on reasons such as age. If it's 10 years or older, we're going to retire that rope. If it's been used and shock loaded, what does that mean, shock load? Shock load means that I have a load on the end of the rope, and that load was free falling for a period of time. And then the rope caught that object and stopped it from free falling. And that stopping action is what we call shock loading. So when that occurs, the rope has to be inspected. And usually when that does happen, the rope is taken out of service and it's retired, and we get a new one in place. So when we retire rope, it has to also be documented to show that this rope was taken out of service on this date and for this reason. Now, here's the bonus. I mentioned two categories: life safety rope and utility rope. Well, if I have life safety rope that I'm retiring or no longer going to use for life safety purposes, guess where that rope gets to go? It gets to go into the utility rope pile. So now I can use that for anything else besides life safety. So if I got to hoist up access to the roof, if I need to use that to tie off a ladder to a wall so it won't fall down in the station for storage, I can use that rope for utility purposes. And that's where we can benefit from that retired rope. So as I mentioned, inspecting. We need to have documentation, as I mentioned. So some kind of piece of paper that's a log. We call it a rope log. And that rope log is like a history paper showing the history of that rope from when it first began, its inception, its birth date, as it is in the fire service, to when we take it to its retirement date. So hopefully you have a rope log that's going to show the history of your ropes being in service. And when you do your monthly inspections, it shows that on this date and time, it was inspected by firefighter Smith and all's good. That's part of my rope log, is those monthly inspections as well. I also want to help myself. If I'm inspecting my rope, I want to have some way to identify it. So I'm going to label or affix a tag to the rope to say, this is rope number 1, or this is rope A-1, or some system you have. You're going to label and identify that piece of rope. So when we look at the rope log and say, oh, rope number 5 is now 11 years old, we got to pull out of service, I can go to my truck and I can find the rope labeled number 5. That's it. Grab it, and there you go. Right. So have some way also of identifying your rope, so it's easy for us to know which one is which. Okay, so I already mentioned the uses for utility rope. I'm not going to keep beating this dead horse in terms of repeating the information, but as I mentioned before, anything not life safety related is going to be classified as utility rope. Very, very important for us to remember. If I'm going to downgrade a piece of life safety rope to be utility rope, it has to be clearly identified. So nobody by accident can grab that piece of rope and use it for life safety when it's no longer viable for it. Right. So make sure it's in some big giant letters on the rope bag, utility rope, or what some departments do is they have a color coding system. So all the life safety rope is going to be in a blue bag, blue being life. And our utility rope will be in all the orange rope bags, orange being utility or orange being everyday, uses. So that way, if the rope's in an orange bag, I know it's for utility purposes. If it's in a blue bag, it's going to be for life safety purposes. But regardless, whatever system you choose, it has to be clearly identified that that rope is life safety rope or it is utility rope. All right, so what makes up our rope, right? Manufacturers make it. What gives that rope its defining properties? And there are different materials used. We have, again, two classifications: natural fibers and synthetics. Natural being what we grow. So cotton, hemp are two good examples that are natural fibers that we can grow. We can cultivate it, we can take it and then make it into a natural fiber rope. But synthetic is what we make, man-made. It's what you and I take into a chemistry lab. We make these materials, and then from that material we can produce the in this case the rope that we're going to be using. And in the case of life safety rope, we use synthetic fibers for life safety rope. Why? Because it gives us a stronger breaking strength. It gives us a stronger working strength when using that under load. Under load means I have a person hanging off of that rope. And so synthetic fibers have been proven to give us what we need for breaking strengths and working strength. Natural fiber rope is not going to provide that, which is why it's usually and always associated with utility rope, right? So with synthetic fibers, we do have different types of fibers that are available that manufacturers will sometimes use in making that synthetic fiber rope for us. One of the benefits to synthetic fibers is that we can it lasts longer. It will resist abrasion a bit better. If it gets wet, it dries quicker. It's not going to be rotting as natural rope will. So anything hemp, cotton, constructed, natural fiber, when it's wet, it has to be thoroughly dried or else it will rot when sitting there in a compartment on a truck. So here are some of the examples of some synthetic fibers. I'm not going to go into detail, but there they are, right? Manufacturers will pull those different fibers or materials and use that to make their rope. Now, what is important to know is where it says disadvantage. If you look at the slide there, what's a disadvantage to synthetic rope? It's heat. So anything that's very hot, elevated temperatures, and we're talking not the heat like from the sun, but the heat from, say, fire, a very hot object, hot, extremely elevated hot water pipes, or a very, very, very hot surface that's been elevated to an extreme temperature. If any of our synthetic rope comes in contact with a elevated, heated surface, it will melt. It will melt that rope. So that's a disadvantage to synthetic rope. The great way to picture this in your mind is if you guys do have sticks of butter that you use for cooking your food or have access to, if you took a very superheated hot knife and you put the hot knife to the butter, it's going to just slice and melt that butter very easily. That's what happens to synthetic rope. It's the same idea when exposed to heat. There's some examples of natural rope. I mentioned already two of them that we can grow and cultivate, but again, different ones that we can use. And I've already mentioned the disadvantages as well as the advantages, and I'm not gonna repeat myself there. So synthetic rope, life safety purposes, how is it constructed? You're seeing 4 methods in a picture format showing us how this rope is constructed. The most popular and the most common is the first one listed. It's called Kernmantel rope. That's a German word. It has 2 parts, Kern and the mantle, and it's the two words are being used to detail and describe how the rope is made. So the kern is a German word meaning core. And as you see in the picture, there the lighter gray, lighter blue circular long tube. That's the core of the rope. And so that core is made up of many strands of rope. I'm sure you've all seen thread used for sewing. You see how small thread is. A very, very small, piece of thread. That's all we use to, hem our pants or hem our shirt or make a nice garment for us to wear for clothing. Well, the core of the rope is like multiple strands or thousands of strands of thread bundled together, and that's what the core is. And so by doing that, it offers a lot of strength for us to use. Because it's not just one piece of thread that's being used, it's many of them coming together. So it's kind of like the teamwork aspect that Jose mentioned in the beginning, right? We as a fire service, we don't do our jobs individually. We do it together as a group. Why? Because it's a stronger workforce in doing it. And we get much more accomplished as a group working. So if I have only one individual working on a task, not much will get done compared to if I have 8 firefighters working on a task. I can get a lot more done. There's more together, they're stronger, they can do more, and they can produce more. Same thing with our rope. The core has multiple strands of threads to make it strong, to make it work better for us in the long run. The mantle is the German word for a covering or a shield. And as you see in the picture, the hexagon kind of darker blue and green color of the rope, that's the outside covering. That's the outside shield of the rope. So that's what protects the core from getting damaged. It's like having a jacket put over top of you to keep yourself warm in the cooler weather. Same idea for the rope. It's being used to protect the core. It offers a little bit of strength, but the majority of it is in the core itself. The other 3 types you see there are used, but not quite as popular for the most part, but similar idea. But you're going to find for the most part, and I say 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the Kermantle method of construction. Right? So there's an example, an actual real picture of showing you the outside sheath, the outside covering, and then what the inside core looks like. And those white strands of rope, and when you actually take them apart, you can actually see how they're twisted together. When you actually untwist them, there's like fine little pieces of thread. That's how small they are in diameter. So very, very amazing how it all comes together and provides that strength for us for rope rescue. Okay, so with Kermantle rope, in life safety, tech rescue operation, I have to say pick a person who's maybe fallen off a building or fell down a big cliff into a ravine. I got to lower someone down to help them and then bring them both back up. What kind of Kermantle rope am I going to use? And there are 2 more categories for us to kind of define: dynamic rope and static rope. Dynamic rope is designed to stretch. So when we put a load on the end of that rope, it is designed to elongate or stretch itself quite long in its overall length. It may be, it'll be more than 10% of its original length. So if I have 100 feet of rope and I put a load on it and it stretches, it could be as long as 110, 150, 120 feet in length with that load on it. Static rope means it does not stretch as much. It will still, but it does not stretch as much as dynamic. As you see there in the wording, the bullet points under that static rope category, at the very last one, it says must not elongate more than 10% when under load. That means if I have 100 feet of rope, it must not stretch or elongate more than 10% of the overall length, no more than 10 feet. So there'll be a bit of stretch to it, but not a lot. Why is this important for us to know with regards to rope rescue? Because if I have a firefighter on the end of that rope and I have to go and lower that firefighter over the edge and go down and then pick off somebody who's fallen over, say a cliff edge, and then bring them back up, I don't want that rope to be stretching and stretching and stretching and stretching and adding more length and more length, because as that firefighter is being lowered down, there's a good chance that he may hit that ground quite hard if that rope is constantly stretching. And then when I add the other person to that load, and now I have two of us on the end of that rope will stretch even more. Not good for us. We want static rope. We want the rope to not stretch and to maintain that overall length, so that as we're estimating how far down we're lowering or how much we're raising up, or when the firefighter has stopped and he's working to get that person picked off and onto their system, that they're not going to be dropping 5 or 6 feet more and maybe getting into a much more hazardous environment, right? So we want that rope to be static. So if we're buying or using Kermantle rope that's life safety rated, it has to be static rope. It cannot stretch beyond its length any more than by 10%. With utility rope, okay, utility rope, as I mentioned, can be anything. A lot of times it's going to be natural fiber, and you're seeing a picture here of like hemp rope that's twisted together. So that's how we can usually identify what utility rope will look like for the most part. And the advantage of this, it's very easy for us to inspect twisted rope. All I have to do is take the rope and untwist it in the other direction, and it opens up the rope on the inside, and I can look in and see what does the inside of the rope look like, and then let it twist back into its original shape, and it goes back to the original twisted fashion. All right, I'm going to skip the braided rope because it's not really used too much, and I want to get to I did talk about inspecting. I'll get to inspecting a little bit more. So I'm looking at inspecting rope. As I mentioned, it's got to be on a regular basis. Usually month is the average time, but at least once a year is what you got to do. But most departments will do it on a month by month basis. And when we are doing it, it must be documented again. It's important for us to document the inspection process and what we found with that rope, because rope does get exposed to lots of stuff. It gets exposed to elements, being the weather, heat. It gets exposed to chemicals if it's being dragged through something. It gets exposed to water, sharp objects, debris. So it will sometimes catch a sharp object, like maybe a piece of glass or a piece of metal fiber, and it's in that rope now, and that's not going to be good for the rope or for us as we're using it, right? So that's why we have to make sure we inspect the rope on a regular basis to make sure it's actually good for us to use and to be deployed when needed. When we are looking at inspecting our Kermantle rope, right, it's with our bare fingers. Again, bare hands, because we're going to feel, I want to feel the rope as well as visually look at it. When I'm inspecting, I'm going to put a bit of tension as I'm inspecting the rope. And this is a bit of a slow process. It's not just take the rope bag, look at it, yep, it's good, put it back. It means taking the rope out of the rope bag and going through it inch by inch or millimeter by millimeter to inspect that rope all the way through from end to end. And that's going to involve putting a bit of tension, squeezing it, feeling it with your fingers. Kermantle rope is kind of like our bodies. If I break my arm today I'm going to be able to feel that broken bone in my arm. Same idea with commando rope. If the commando rope has a broken core or has a stretch core at a certain spot because it was shock loaded, as I'm feeling the rope with my fingers, I will feel that with my hands as far as a very soft spot. It won't feel hard, it'll be very soft. And now I'll kind of be like, unusual, because it's very soft here, but yet on the other sides of it, it's very hard. That indicates something's not right, right? So that's why I use our bare fingers, bare hands. You're squeezing it, put a bit of tension to feel for those lumps, those depressions, those soft spots, and get a good handle on whether the rope is good or not good, as well as visually looking for my damage that can be apparent on the outside of my rope, like the rope abrasion. So it's been used quite a bit on a surface, and that rubbing on a surface will abrase the rope so it starts to look like fuzzy in appearance, and that is the beginning of the breakdown of the rope's outer sheath deteriorating and exposing the core to the same kind of abrasion. There's an example of something getting burned, right? So if it gets exposed to high heat, it's going to have that melted look to it. We can see right away, hey, that's been burned. That rope is now out of service, right? So that's a very obvious sign that we can see right away when we're inspecting our rope. So what else am I looking for with inspecting rope? Dirt or grease that may have been caught on it or dragged through. I'm gonna look for any cuts. The rope's been cut or nicked. Nick is a word meaning that it's not cut all the way through, but has a small little cut. So when you're shaving in the morning, for those who shave, you gotta shave your beard, shave your mustache. When using your razor to shave, sometimes will nick your skin, a little slight cut. Same idea, right? I nick my skin, I nick the rope because I'm using it. I can see that nick in the rope. That's not needed. That's not good. That rope is now out of service and it's to be repaired. Okay, rope rot. I mentioned that in the beginning, right? So we don't want to have our rope sitting and rotting in a nice, warm, airtight compartment. And our trucks, our fire trucks, they will have compartments, obviously. And when the truck is sitting in the sun or in the warm weather, those compartments get heated up. It's like a big oven in those compartments. And with our rope in the bag, if the rope is wet, that will start that rotting process. And that's the rope breaking down chemically. So it's the air mixing with the water and the material in the water starts to break down as far as decomposition, and with mixing with the air, that's how I get that rot. It has a very nasty smell to it, and eventually over time, when that rope is rotting, it will be destroyed. And so it comes time to use it, it will no longer have that strength it needs to be utilized in a life safety fashion. So we want to prevent rope rot. How do we do that? We make sure the rope is always dry, right? So if we use it, if there's a big monsoon storm came down, we're using rope outside to help save a person that's stranded, and we bring the rope back to the fire hall, we got to make sure it's laid out, dried out first. And when it's dry, we then put the rope back in storage at that point. Okay, so let's see. Let's get to cleaning, right? I mentioned cleaning rope's also important for us to do. We want to make sure we use soap and water that will wash it, clean it, dry it, and then we put it back in service so the rope is clean and not kept dirty all the time, because dirty rope is not going to be good for us at all. All right, so I mentioned rope log. There's an example of an ID tag on the rope identifying the number. In this case, it's using number 5B, 5 Bravo, has the length on it. So that's how we can identify that piece of rope. And then may even put the date of when that rope was put in service at the same time. All right, so rope storage, rope bags. We want to have bags to keep our rope, right? So We can't just put rope and throw it in the compartment and let it sit there. It's got to be in some kind of bag so we can easily grab the bag and take the rope with us. If I got 100 feet of rope or more, that's a lot of rope to try and grab into your hands and try and walk with it to where you got to go, as compared to putting all of that into one big bag and grabbing a bag, and I can take that with me. So make sure you're using rope bags to store your rope in there. Another good thing for us to use for rope rescue is webbing. Right? So we've looked at so far rope, but there's also webbing, and webbing is very, very beneficial and useful for us with life safety and rope rescue and anything in the fire ground. When I'm down there with you fine folks in November, I'll have my webbing with me, my webbing roll, and I'm sure it depends on what I'm teaching. I'm sure I will incorporate that webbing into what I'm teaching to show how it can be used for multiple applications in the fire service. But webbing is like rope. Rope is round in diameter, and webbing is just like flattened to be a pancake. It's flat, but 1 inch in width, but flat. And when you look at how it's constructed, same idea as Cormanto rope. It's multiple threads in a flat pattern back and forth. And when you look at that, it's very strong how it's designed, and provides incredible strength, both wet and dry when the webbing is used. So we want to use webbing as well in rope rescue, because we can use that to tie off or create anchor points to attach our systems to around a solid object. We can also use that webbing to make a harness to attach around a person with that webbing to then snap them in or include them into our rope rescue system to either raise them up or lower them down. So webbing is very versatile and very much needed in terms of rope rescue. So there's a picture of what that looks like, right? There's two types, flat webbing and what's called tubular webbing. It's also flat in nature, but flat webbing is not meant for life safety. Tubular webbing is. It's much stronger, much more, has a much higher breaking strength and much higher working strength. And so if you're looking at getting webbing or buying webbing, make sure it is tubular webbing and not flat. Same thing for rope. We can inspect our webbing, same process. It's hand by hand, short incremental distances, looking at my webbing. I'm feeling it, looking at it. I'm visually inspecting it. I can maintain it. I can clean it. I can wash it. I want to store it as well, so it's kept stored in some kind of device, be it a small little bag or something else. Again, when I come down November, you'll probably see how I store my webbing in my gear, and I can show it to you then. But I use a medical glove to store my webbing, about 20 feet rolled up into a glove, and there it is. So it's difficult to describe this way by Zoom. It's best if I show it to you, show and tell. So we'll wait till November and I can show it to you then. All right, we're getting to the closing of our time. Let's look at the different knots that we can use. And it's important to identify, when we're looking at knots, there are different names or parts of a knot that we want to be familiar with. So the one term is called the running part. And as you see in the slide, there is an arrow pointing to the rope itself, and that's the free end that we use of the rope for hoisting or pulling. That's the running part. The standing part, as the arrow is pointing to, is the section between the working end and the running part. So that's that in-between part. And then the working end is the actual part of the rope that's tied around something. That's the working end. So in the case of our picture, we see a ladder being raised up to the window, and the working end of the rope is where the ladder's tied at the end of that rope and then being raised up. And in between that working end and the firefighter is the standing part. And where the firefighter has his hands on the rope, that is the running part of the rope. When we are tying a knot, right? We tie it. We want to make sure that the knot is snug and tight when we're finished with it. And then you want to, what we call dress it. What does that mean? It means we're going to make the knot look nice. It's not going to look messy. It's not going to look like some person with no eyesight tied the knot. Someone who's blind, right? So it looks nice and neat. And when it's a nice, neat, dressed knot, it will work properly with its proper strengths for working. And we can easily identify what kind of knot that is by visually seeing. And we can tell, is it properly tied or not properly tied? That's why we make sure we dress the knot, right? And then a lot of knots that we use to make sure that it won't come undone, that it will not come undone, we will tie an overhand safety knot, just to be sure that this will not undo itself when we don't want it to, right? So that's the process for us in terms of tying knots. In terms of the fire service, we want to use knots that are easy for us to tie and easy for us to untie. So there's lots of knots in the world, lots of them. As far as rope work for people who work on ships in the marine world, in the industrial sector, there's lots of knots that we can use. But lots of those knots are not easy for us to tie, and they're not easy to untie. We want, in our industry, as far as a firefighter goes, it needs to be easy to tie and untie. But at the same time, when it is tied, it's secure, right? So that's the kind of knots that we want to have and use in the fire service. When looking at our knots that we use, again, different names of the knots as far as the parts are what we also refer to. And so you see in the one picture, it's called the bite. And the bite forms part of our knot. For example, a figure 8 on a bite. And now you know a bite is simply just a piece of rope in a circular fashion held by one point, in this case, a firefighter's hand. That's a bite. A loop is simply just the rope in a circular fashion on top of each other, as you see in the picture there in the middle. That's a loop. A round turn is just a big circle. The rope is in a circular fashion, making like a wheel, basically. That's a round turn. These three parts, the bites, the loops, and the round turns, are what we use to tie our knots. So the bite, as I mentioned, a figure 8 on a bite, that's a very commonly used fire service knot. The loop, we use that to tie our clove hitch. Again, a very commonly used knot. A round turn forms the clove hitch, very commonly used in the fire service. And so if we know what these parts of the knot are, it helps us to tie them when it comes time there. Overhand safety knot, as you see there, it's just simply like tying your shoes. It's just simply an overhand knot. That's it. And by doing that, we secure the knot a bit better. That's all that is. So in the case of a clove hitch, as you see here on the picture to your right, with the clove hitch, the clove hitch is a series of round turns and loops combined together. At the very end, we tie off the safety knot, and that helps to prevent that knot from untying itself when under load. Figure 8s, very, very popular for us in the fire service. Easy for us to tie, easy to untie, and provides incredible strength when under load. And from this, we can tie multiple knots. So the figure 8 is your basic, as you see here in the picture. When it's tied, it looks like the number 8. That's why it's called a figure of 8. And from this, we can tie a figure 8 on a bite. We can do a figure 8 follow through. We can do, it's called a tracer figure 8. We can do a double figure 8. So there's multiple knots that we can tie in the figure 8 family that we can use for tech rescue, rope rescue purposes. within the fire service. Okay, here's a picture of a figure eight on a bite. And again, we'll use that as an anchor point. We can put a carabiner through the bite at the end and secure that to our anchor point, for example. If I'm going to secure a person to the end of my rope, I will use a figure eight on a bite. That'll be what's tied, and I will snap that into their harness with a carabiner or some kind of device, and that secures them to my rope. Very, very strong knot, easy to tie and easy to untie. When we're finished tying it and it's snug and tight and I properly dress it, it's easy for me to also identify that's a figure eight on a bite. And I know that that is because I can tell it's in that same 8 fashion that the number 8 looks like. A water knot. So this is primarily used for webbing. And a water knot is used to tie 2 ends of webbing together to make it incredibly strong. And water knot, because it can be used in water, obviously, it'll be used webbing a lot in water rescue, but it's designed that it will not untie itself even when it's wet or under load or just sitting there doing nothing. So very, very easy for us to tie it. It's sometimes hard to untie when it's been under load or been very, very much tightened. It can be difficult to untie at times. However, when we usually tie a water knot, we tie it and it's left. We're not going to untie it because in this case, you see here in the picture, we're tying a continuous loop that we're going to use as an anchor point, for example. So we tie it once and we're leaving it, and that's how it's going to stay to be used as an anchor point later on down the road. Okay, let's see here. So I mentioned we can use rope to be used for a lot of non-life safety purposes. And here you're seeing some examples. Firefighters who may have forgot some tools, right? So we got one guy forgot to bring the axe up, and now they got to use use a rope and raise that axe up to the window. Another firefighter forgot to bring a chainsaw. Same thing. They got to bring now a piece of rope, lower it down, and raise it up. Another firefighter forgot to bring the hose line with him. I mean, how can you forget to bring a hose line with you? But he forgot the hose line. So there you see a picture of a firefighter and is in the window, and the firefighter on the ground, and they've rigged up that uncharged hose line and they're raising up to the window to be used for their firefighting purposes. So if I am hoisting equipment, it's very common. You can do it all the time. We want to make sure we, of course, have the equipment secure. As you see in the picture, the saw is secured to the red rope. But to prevent that tool from smacking off the wall as we're raising it up, we want to tie a tag line as well. So the white rope is my tag line, and that's where the firefighter on the bottom is going to hold on to. So as you go back to this previous picture, when they're raising the object up to the window, in this case, the axe and the chainsaw is not smacking or hitting the wall as it's going up. It's being kept in tension and prevents damage to the building, but more importantly, is preventing damage to the equipment that's being raised. And it's in full control by both the top and by the bottom firefighter. So we always want to tie tag lines when we are raising equipment up to the roof. What can we use for hardware? Well, I mentioned the word carabiner, and you're seeing a picture of that, and that's a very useful device in rope work that I can use to affix a piece of rope to an object. Right, so I have a figure eight on a bite. I put a carabiner through the end of my loop on the figure eight on a bite, and then I can snap the carabiner into a harness or an anchor strap or something I want to have it secured to make that connection. Very, very strong piece of hardware, and it has to be designed for, again, life safety purposes. It has to be rated for life safety. We'll use pulleys. You see the picture to the right is a red pulley, and we use that as a way to change the direction of my rope. So if I'm going one direction with my rope, I want to come back another way, I can put a pulley into the system, and that's a change of direction. It also is used to help in reducing the overall strength it takes to raise or lower or pull an object. So if I have a series of pulleys in tandem set up, I can what's called create mechanical advantage, which means I can use less strength on my end to pull that rope to maybe raise or lower an object because of a series of pulleys and the rope going through the pulley system. It's actually reducing the overall load on the end as far as my strength needed to pull it or lower it, right? So I can create mechanical advantage with my pulleys as well. And there's a picture right there showing that, right? So there's my mechanical advantage. You can see there that with only say one pulley, the object weighs 200 pounds. I only need 100 pounds of strength to pull that object up. If I go right to the very end, 6-to-1, if I can create that system with a series of pulleys and a couple carabiners in my rope, if the object weighs 200 pounds, all I need is 33 pounds of strength to pull that rope and raise or lower that 200-pound load. So you can see how pulleys, when used in conjunction with each other and set up in a tandem operation, they can create for us the mechanical advantage to help reduce the work on our end when lifting, lowering, or pulling an object. Right, so there's an example, a picture showing a system being set up. That's called a 3-to-1 system right there, and that's going to give that firefighter the advantage of pulling. When I'm using my rope, I mentioned for inspecting the abrasion, right? A rope going over the edge or in contact with something, it's constantly rubbing on it. How can I protect that rope from being abrased? You're seeing a picture of something being used to protect the rope from the edge. So we can put something on the edge, some padding, some type, doesn't matter what it is, but it's protecting the rope from not getting abrased too much when it's consistently moving or being lowered or raised over the edge there. And it looks like my time might be up. We're at that 10 o'clock hour here on my end, or the 1 hour time frame. So we'll end our lesson there, it looks like. And hopefully what we just covered off today, again, the very basics, nothing sexy at all, but is very important for us to know about as far as rope, how to use it, what kind of rope to be used, how to make sure I inspect it, maintain it, clean it, store it, and how it can be utilized in both a tech rescue or firefighter, fireground operation, as well as even on the non-fireground situations as well, right? Very foundational for us to have and to build upon at that point. So I thank you for your time again. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day and your afternoon and into the night. And I'm not sure I'm back with you again in terms of doing this, but if I don't see you between now and November, hopefully I'll see you fine folks in November at that point in time.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come here and be with us today. Good luck at your next meeting there. I'll invite everybody to stick around. We're going to begin tea time in just a few moments here. If you have any questions from today's class, I'll take those questions and try to answer them as best I can based off Mark's presentation today. So thank you all for being around. I invite you to join us again next week. Invite anybody else that you may know to come along. Thanks, everybody.